name is Tim Lynch. I was the chief engineer for New York City. Set up the forensic unit and came over from the private after working 16 years with Robert Silman's office. I was actually asked to join the city because they were having foundation failure. A lot of foundation failures, 8 people getting killed a year. So myself and another engineer set up a forensic unit that migrated to an excavation unit that migrated to all of these siege units for doing emergency response. And we really basically updated DOB, Department of Buildings. New York City has 1.1 million buildings, but nearly everything in every municipality is a residential building. So when you get an infrastructure emergency, it's usually on a residential building. There's 550,000 residential buildings in New York City. You think that New York City is bristling with high-rises, but it's really not. There's only 16,000 high-rises in New York City, and still high-rises, anything over 7 stories is really your sweet spot for mid-rise buildings. So really between 7 stories and 15 stories, that's your kind of sweet spot for anything over a 6-story residential building. And residential buildings, no matter where you go, France, Spain, Germany, they're nearly all under 6 stories. The cluster of buildings that you're going to have to respond to generally, 1 and 2 family dwellings. And they're in numbers. And when you get a large weather event or a large earthquake, it's usually 1 and 2s that really cause a lot of problems. You displace a lot of people in small buildings, and then you got to house them, feed them, and then do the assessments. Not complicated work. The housing stock that you're doing evaluations on, not super complicated. So we sort of subdivide our housing into residential, commercial, publicly owned, and others. The bulk of it is residential. The work is not complicated. It's going to be a data management issue. When we had Sandy, it was particularly ugly. New York City was not prepared for it. We did have an incident command system set up after 9/11. But Sandy hit 66,000 buildings. And the problem with 66,000 buildings was, what were they? There were 1s and 2s. 66,000 buildings displaced so many people. And then you got to house them for a couple of weeks. A general deployment for New York City, 4 to 6 weeks. Now I've done mutual aid up and down the East Coast, I've been down to Puerto Rico, I've been to Louisiana. Your standard deployment for an emergency response job, 2 to 6 weeks. The after effects and the legacy issues from the event last years, but generally your deployment is 2 to 6 weeks. Okay? And 2 weeks on any emergency response job is a lot.
Tim, do you mean when volunteers are coming in to your jurisdiction?
Even municipal agencies.
They come in for 2 to 6 weeks.
Even municipal agencies. The standard deployment to keep people on the street is 2 to 6 weeks. What even happens is the municipal agencies, the staff get wiped out after 2 to 6 weeks. That's the problem. So what happens is it's very glamorous responding to the incident. But if you're not in decent shape, you get wiped out after about 2 or 3 days. People get blisters, their legs are bad, people with respiratory illnesses are an issue. When we do deployments, you have to make sure that the people that you're sending out do not become one of the victims and the hazards that you have to cure. We actually had that in Puerto Rico where we got people that got sick on the trip. It's very glamorous work, and it sounds great in the bar, but it's not great work to do, and you need to be in decent shape. And you have to do it promptly. And the other issue is when a municipality pulls the trigger in an emergency, everybody goes to work. I told all the people that I trained when I was doing the training for incident management, I said, when you get a call, you're going to work. There's no sitting around, there's no elective, you're going to work. You're doing assessment. The work is easy, but you'll be out there. There'll be no messing around, you're going to work. And then that's another issue is a lot of municipal agencies, they think that their senior staff will not be on the street. You will be on the street. You'll find that the other issue is your staff municipal agencies get wiped out very, very fast after a couple of days. That's why you end up having to call in staff. You don't need them for the technical expertise. What you need them for is manpower or person power. Go ahead.
By wiped out, you mean?
Their legs are gone. They don't get enough sleep. There's not food and water. The power's out. They got to go home and look after their dogs. I've seen it and heard it. Okay, and I don't want to do it after 2 days. It's very hot, it's dirty work. I can't get a good night's sleep. My clothes are dirty, my shoes don't fit. I'm not in great shape. I've been smoking 40 a day for 20 years. I've heard it and I've seen it. But everybody's going to work in a natural disaster. Okay? Be it an earthquake or be it a hurricane. Okay? And they roll around. Even if you're not working in your own agency, you may be deployed to go to another. And when we had Sandy, we weren't ready for Sandy. Sandy was not huge relative to numbers for a natural disaster. When you get a large storm rolling up the east coast and north, along the Atlantic seaboard, you could hit 250,000 buildings en route. So 66,000 buildings in New York City was not substantial, but the problem was it displaced a lot of people. And I wrote every demolition order, I signed them personally. There was 550 demolition orders in Sandy. We took down 550 buildings when we did that event. And people come in and I don't want my building taken down, they'd be in tears when you're done with them. Expect it. I was quite surprised because we were told you'll need mental health professionals with you. I don't need mental health professionals. It wasn't for me. It was for the people that came in. You told them you're taking your house down. Everything they had, you're not going back in. I saw it, okay? So this is what happens with a large storm, and I'm going to talk about earthquakes as well because we had them in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, large numbers of small dwelling with displacement. And the problem with a hurricane, it's one and done. It's over. You're done with it the following day. But you have a legacy for a while. Earthquakes, you could have a legacy with minor tremors for 30 years. Earthquakes are slightly different. So you kind of have to get used to that people will be very nervous after the initial event. Okay. So that's the size that we had for Sandy, and we were not prepared for it. It was immense. It went from Florida to New England. And it was a substantial amount of energy in it. It was up there with Isabel. It was 1,000 miles wide. Irene Sandy is 140 trillion joules of energy. It's incredible the amount of energy these things punch. Likewise with a hurricane, or likewise with an earthquake. If you actually categorize and you quantify the amount of energy, it's astronomical. Okay? So we've had big ones that roll up the East Coast, and that's what you're watching for. How long is it going to be and how much energy is it going to be? Over the last 20 years, I've been running an incident response unit with Sione. I see somebody working with a SEA t-shirt here today. Structural engineers. We've been training people to do response, to be deployed for mutual aid. That work is diminishing quite a bit because a lot of the destroyed late 19th century, early 20th century residential housing has been swapped out. It's already been smashed up by these storms in the last 20 years. And just attrition is wiping out all of those old buildings. So a lot of the buildings that are getting built now are actually code compliant buildings. And I'm quite surprised you don't really get as much mutual aid as we used to get because most of the municipalities are taking these response jobs very seriously. I was quite surprised when Portland asked for a presentation, because I was these things are really taken quite seriously now by relatively small municipalities. You need to be ready and you need to be prepared for the deployment. And you need to have the infrastructure. The work itself is not consequential. We're doing a residential building and a structural evaluation, you can do it in 10 minutes. When I was in Puerto Rico, I was hitting 100 buildings a day. 100 a day, it was exhausting. But we were flying through the buildings. But you need a fair amount of infrastructure to keep it in play. And everybody basically being on the same music sheet. You do not have time to practice when you're sent. And you guys could be sent anywhere, or ladies, or anybody. You could be sent mutual aid to somewhere. California could get a massive one. And then the next thing, everybody's sent for mutual aid. Okay?
Hey, Tim.
Go ahead.
When you say that they need a lot of infrastructure, you mean the incident command post with finance, planning, right, logistics, that stuff, not
the
pipes.
Biggest infrastructure is going to be your IT lift. ATC 20 and ATC 45 were analog. I spoke to ATC about digitizing their processes less than 3 months ago. They said it's over. We're not digitizing nothing. What's ended up happening is ATC is an analog system. It's extremely simple, it's extremely useful, but it is analog. You can purchase a digital version of it, collector app. It's made manual operations of incidents obsolete. It's done. You can't get the data management doing manual analog operations. Sandy was analog. It was a brute. What ended up happening is everybody brought in the fields, the stickers at the end of the day, and then we had to enter them onto a spreadsheet. Okay, the last couple of times we've gone to Puerto Rico, we've been using collector apps, spike tools, all of these different tools, and I'll talk about that. It has made the likelihood of making an error with data collection negligible. Carrying pieces of paper around in your back pocket based on an evaluation is obsolete. What ends up happening, I was quite surprised, you nearly never go back to the ops center. And the other issue is, once you're done for a week or two in the field, you have the paper in your back pocket, you do not go back to the same buildings. I was always surprised by that. I thought, well, we'll have a chance to revisit it afterwards. Never happens. The first thing we do when we hit these areas is we go straight to the essential facilities. We forget about the residential. They get time, but there's a lot of them, but it's not complicated. We go straight to essential facilities. Essential facilities have to be hit up early, because even if they're not damaged, they're used for food distribution and they're used as housing. The other issue is there's a lot of schools that are essential facilities, and when you have the kids in the schools, or you can't get the kids out of the homes from the residences back into the schools, because the schools means the parents can't go back to work. We had it in Puerto Rico. What happens is nobody evaluated the schools, so therefore the parents couldn't leave the kids. So there was no damage at home, and the kids couldn't get out and be fed. First thing we did is we went straight to the essential facilities. They're rarely in big numbers. And then what happens is that got the parents out of the house, and it got the kids over into the schools. They could be fed, and now we had a distribution center for food. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the World Trade Center and Sandy. So that's Manhattan. So this is why Sandy was so I just picked this as a case study, why Sandy hit us so badly. That's the island in the 1600s. And this is the green outline of it today. Actually, it was in 2013. It's a little bigger now. So what happens is all of these fill areas get inundated when we get a storm. You get a different soils characteristics, which my colleague was talking about today. And anything that's fill areas like that were made up since natural soil and natural landscapes, they flood. So this happens to be where the World Trade Center is relative to what the island looked in the 1650s. It's way off into the river. And that's where it's located now. We've added an immense amount of real estate to the island. And that's where the Trade Center is now. It's interesting because the Trade Center was very well documented. So I'm going to give you some photographs of some things, some of the trauma that the city had based around the Trade Center. So everybody should be able to sort of relate to this. So here's the island landmass, and everything that got flooded is in blue. And that was one of our major tunnels and highways. There's 12 foot of water in it. I saw this, I saw it with my own eyes. These systems were not hardened. We didn't have a problem with the flooding, but the problem was none of the systems were hardened during Sandy. So therefore there was no telecom, there was no power, there was no communication. We had one phone line left open in the Department of Buildings and nobody hung it up. Okay? So it went straight to City Hall. Without good data you can't record, and the people who need data are the mayor's office. They want to know how many people have been displaced, how many buildings have been damaged, and interestingly it's the elected official that needed the data. So we had a hotline to the elected officials for Sandy. We also did it for any of the trips down we did to Puerto Rico to figure out how many people needed to get displaced. The first phone call you get in an emergency is from the mayor's office. How many people are injured? How many people are out of their homes? How many people do we have to house? Because then they're straight on to the press. Okay? So this is one of these subway stations completely flooded. Actually, I'm going to show this one. Can you trigger this first? This is inside the Trade Center. Inspired me. Is it going to trigger? IT. I love it. Okay, is that going to... Did it trigger? It's flooding. It was a remarkable image. The whole thing's flooding. It filled up the whole excavation. There you go. Look at that. That lasted for 6 hours. One and done. Hurricanes. One and done. It was just ghastly. And the problem is, in the middle of an event, you can't deploy anybody. Everybody's waiting to go somewhere. I want to go, I want to give blood, I want to do this, I want to do that. You can't go anywhere till the event's over. Okay, water line, flooded rooms, everything. Okay, and this is do we get incidents? And this is really what we had in Sandy. Small residential buildings in volume. Gas fires, very hard to control a gas fire. We had gas fires here, fire department couldn't get out to them. So the buildings burnt. Okay, this was in Breezy Point. It's on the sort of end of Manhattan. And then we also get tornadoes. Just because you're waiting for an earthquake does not mean that you're going to go to work. You could have a deployment with a large event in the building. We had a fire yesterday here down Portland. You could pull the trigger on an emergency response for that. Why? Because there's multiple agencies have to respond. Transit is down, subways are, well, you don't have subways here, but we would have telecom would be down if it was running through the property. So you'd have multiple agencies responding to that large fire. Plus the other issue is you don't want the incident to migrate somewhere else. So it's not just the building department that goes to work. Infrastructure is going to work. Mayor's office is going to work. Elected officials, people are displaced. So this is kind of interesting. So this is what we had, just gazillions of these 1 and 2 family dwellings that were destroyed. And we get tornadoes pretty regularly in New York. Enough to, lift the roofs off all the houses. We do this training so we can respond to that. Not a huge amount of buildings, but the problem is it's very disruptive. Okay? And you need to be prepared for this. Windshields, state preparedness. You can do, within the collector app, a digital collector app, you can do what's called windshield evaluations, which was usually done by your fire department, your police department, who sweep the neighborhoods first. They can be done by engineers now using collector apps. So this is what we used to do, is fire department who had hardened vehicles used to run through the neighborhoods and say, all of these buildings are damaged, you got to send somebody out here. Problem is they didn't record what they looked at. But they did have hardened vehicles. Rubber that size on the tires, snow deployment, all of that. But if you can send people into the street immediately, you can start doing the data collection very, very fast. So with the implementation of collector apps and digital apps now, what it's done is it's forced the evaluation much earlier in the job. So you can actually end up starting your evaluations the same day as your event, which was rare. That's a change in technology. Go ahead.
So you're talking about collector apps as a generic term?
Collector apps is a phone app.
It's a phone app.
I'm going to go through that.
Collector app is part of ArcGIS, and it's been replaced by Survey 123.
Yeah, it's a Survey 123.
That's where I was headed.
Right.
Great.
Yeah. I'm just using the umbrella term collector app.
See how technical I am, guys?
So Survey 123. All of these things, we actually use Esri in New York City. Now, Esri is not just related to building assessments. Esri is used by sanitation, it's used by police, because they use it as a tracking device, a GIS tracking device. All of the municipalities out in Long Island and all up and down the East Coast have migrated over to Esri now, because what they're doing is they're doing live tracking of their vehicles. It's not just specifically this. So if you've got an Esri app that's operational in another municipal agency, you can use an umbrella contract with them to get into doing emergency response. I just happen to like Esri. It's what the city used when we were in Puerto Rico a couple of times. Sandy was done by paper. We used paper, and it was extremely cumbersome. It's over. That system is done, obsolete, because the collection of it and transferring it onto some type of database is just done. Okay? So now what you're on is you're in phone apps. Now the phone apps brought up their own problems, which is the phones would go dead, or you'd be on the wrong system. So when we get deployed, we usually bring 2 phones with us. We bring Sprint and we bring Verizon, 2 phones. And then we all have multiple chargers with us. Multiple chargers. And the other issue is if the cell phone towers are down, you can't transfer the information anyway. So you will find that a lot of your telecommunications are using hardened systems. What they do is they're bringing in mobile repeaters into neighborhoods now that cover about a square mile. These are hardened systems. You have a large event here, you know what Verizon does? They're just going to ship all of their mobile hotspots up here. They'll truck them up, they'll be up in about 2 days. But I was quite surprised by that because we were caught out on it in Puerto Rico. No power, you couldn't charge the phones. Okay? So this is what you can expect to do. 100 evaluations a day. Now you may not be able to do 100 evaluations a day up here because you're not in a dense urban area. So you can't do a lot of surveys on foot because you have to be in a vehicle. Problem with a vehicle is you need gas and you need a driver. And you may not have vehicles all the time. We also had that problem. Rental vehicles get deployed to different units. So somebody's in their private cars. After an incident, flats. We had nothing but flats in Sandy. One guy I remember got 8 flats in a week. Go ahead.
Well, that 1, 2, 3, I thought I remember when we were in that training, they were saying that those apps actually are able to record and hold the data.
Yes.
If you lose connection,
correct,
it will hold the data until you can regain.
I'll deal with that in a minute.
And then
that's true, but you still have a phone that's running on data.
Right.
So as soon as you run on data, it blows up the battery. Okay? And then you've got a day's worth of stuff that you need to download. Now you've got to find a repeater that's working at the end of the day. Okay, Rapid. Rapids, you can do 40 a day. So if you've got 600 buildings, it's not that many. But for your local municipal guys, 600 billion evaluations is a lot. You're not going to be able to, because there's other business going on as well. So you'll end up using mutual aid for about a couple of weeks. I need somebody to come in and help us do evaluations. We're quite surprised. New York City, we went to Buffalo a few times. Buffalo for a snowstorm. Who knows more about snowstorms than Buffalo does? They used to get them every like 5 minutes up there. But they were constantly calling New York City. Why? One, we didn't get paid by the agency. We would go on mutual aid. So we didn't have the local municipal agency didn't have to pay overtime. And then we were able to do volumes. We're so used to doing this work, we used to hit them up and just take everything, all of their work from them, and get it all into information and download it to a dashboard. Detailed evaluation, let's talk about that one. It always gets overlooked. You must get to the essential facilities first. Your most seasoned engineers and your fastest engineers immediately go to your essential facilities. You have to get to the hospitals, the police stores. Generally, fire department looked after their own. Police, hospitals, schools have to be tackled early because you use them for food distribution and relocating people that have nowhere to go. Even if the buildings are not damaged, they must be prioritized. When we went to PR first time, a lot of the municipal agencies were filling out FEMA forms for reimbursable. I said, nobody's doing that anymore. You're all going on the road immediately to start doing essential things. But we need the money. I said, you can do that afterwards. Get administrators to start filling out your FEMA forms. All the engineers go on the street to do essential facilities. And it was a bit of a shock because these guys kind of like filling out the forms and not having to go on the street. All the dirty work and no food and light and power and all of that stuff, and nobody had any gas. It wasn't, they don't have my right shoes on, all the rest of that. Detailed evaluations, you won't have many of them, but they have to be done early. Your seasoned engineers, yes?
Tim, I just wanted to say, in our discussions in this region, it's not clear in each jurisdiction who's going to do the windshield thing. Like I think in the city of Portland, we thought it would be the fire department, but they don't think that's practical anymore.
It's
You could cloud source it.
Fire
You could
will not be
cloud
doing
source it.
windshields if you've
But
got a 1, 2, 3.
For the rapid evaluation, our agreement is pretty much that that's the responsibility of the building department.
That's correct.
For the detailed, that's the responsibility of the building owner. So when you want to do that is, like if we want to use something as an essential facility, right, then we have an interest ourselves in making sure there's a detailed evaluation so that we can use that
Okay, I'm
building.
going to stop you right there because that's what we're going to talk about is detailed evaluations. We're talking about public buildings.
Yeah.
So what happens is this has to be paired with this. Residential, commercial, publicly owned and others. Let's look at this. Detailed evaluations are not done for residential buildings. Detailed evaluations are done for publicly owned buildings. This is where you do your details. The numbers are small. It's only 10% of your population building housing. It's small. You're not doing detail for residential buildings. you're doing detail for public buildings. The other issue that we usually do is detailed evaluations is houses of worship. Houses of worship are usually a focal point of a neighborhood, and they play a huge role. They are the only ones that ever have coffee in an emergency. Okay? So I always do these ones first. The Baptists always have coffee in the southern states, and they always have something to eat. So we go straight to their facilities and do them first. Okay?
Just for the
Houses of
food?
worship- Huh?
Just for the food?
Yes. And the appreciation. Okay, 5%. Nobody else appreciates you on these jobs. You have nothing but bad news for them. Okay, 5%. Public houses of worship, very important. And you can use them. The other thing is people cluster them. They're usually badly maintained. So you have to be careful of those ones because they're usually not well maintained. They can be dangerous buildings. Go ahead.
Just a question, when you talk about essential buildings, I don't know about the city of New York, but when you talk about jail systems,
Yep.
prisons, things like that, that
Yep.
has to be added in there.
You have to add them in. Jails are usually done by their own guys. They're very, very small numbers. You don't have to put them on. Police stations will have to be done. Jails rarely. Okay? But we do jails. But you'll find jail numbers are tiny. And jail will already have an engineer on site. But the generally public buildings, you may have an engineer. You know what the engineer is going to tell you? Well, I don't know. I'm going to get there in about 3 days. I'm waiting for a flight. Or we're already tied up doing other buildings. What you need to do is get public aid servants out into your public buildings immediately to get that first blush of what's going on, and especially hospital buildings. We went to Puerto Rico. They were flooded after the hurricanes, and the hospitals were still operational. It was really quite bad, quite dangerous. Commercial buildings, nobody really cares about them. One thing about commercial buildings, they're usually on the main thoroughfare. So if you've got a parapet problem on them, they can be a public issue because they're on the public way. So watch out for commercial buildings. Okay, but that's where your bulk of work is. These are going to be rapids. And it's very rare that you'll go back and revisit them unless they're structurally damaged to the point of being demoed. Okay? Or CPO. 5% for others. Public buildings about 10%. Pure commercials about 10%. They'll be handled by the owners. But those commercial buildings could also be medical. We usually used to do pharmacies early because people need to pick up medication. So we went to Puerto Rico, we'd hit up pharmacies early. Not that many, but you want to get them on the books early. And if the buildings were damaged, you moved the pharmacy to the parking lot, as long as it was secured. You get them out, move them straight into the parking lot. And it can be done fast. And you can record that information. Okay? Okay, this is very typical. Red placard. Red placards we like red placards. They're time consuming to fill out. The other issue is with placarding the buildings, it's really analog. This is what we did in Sandy. A typical building knocked off its foundation. That got demoed. I wrote 550 demo orders for these things. It's very sad, but there's no salvage on these. They were rarely insured. There was upside down mortgages. There was rental buildings in there, so the landlords didn't care. Okay? And the actual building itself, the building fabric, it wasn't code compliant to start with. It was a legacy building from about 1890 or 1920. It was like one of these early 20th century residential wood frame buildings, very fatigued. Okay? So a lot of this housing stock is getting swapped out. So we're diminishing in our need to do emergency responses up and down the East Coast as the storm wipes out more and more of these frail buildings. And likewise in Puerto Rico. A lot of the really frail buildings didn't survive. Wasn't that many, but they were there. Or CPO. And then the other issue is unsafe, restricted use and inspected. Usually you have to give it back to the owner. If it's safe to occupy or it's restricted use, it's likely you'll never see that building again. Unsafe buildings, this is a dangerous one because you can have people migrating into an unsafe building and that requires attention. So people can get hit. When we were in PR, Puerto Rico, we used to get in the earthquake. What happened was a lot of the TV screens fell off the walls and the dressing cabinets blocked doors and they couldn't get people out of the rooms. So the first thing I told people is, building safe, get rid of your TV and empty your closets. Any closets that could fall across a door, we used to tell them that. Move all of that stuff away from the door. Old people and kids, you can't get them out of a room if you have something blocking the door. So that was one of the things. Okay? And then the forms themselves, very simple. Nothing too complicated about it. Any questions?
So,
Go ahead.
Analog, you're still putting up the placards?
No. In
No.
Puerto Rico, we were spraying the gate posts.
Just spraying them red, yellow, or?
Correct. But really what happens is, once you digitize the system, and I'm going to go through this in more detail, once the system is digitized and you've got a GIS, that's the other issue with these incidents, is it's difficult to find addresses. It's very difficult. Puerto Rico didn't have street addresses. We had to go onto GIS. They had no street addresses for anything. So you tag the buildings on the front door. But many times you'll find that the building is destroyed to the point of being it doesn't exist. Up in Buffalo, where you couldn't get at the house, you'd hit it with the laser pointer. That technology has been great. You can keep all the information on a dashboard. If the dashboard is updated, you don't have to talk to anybody. We would update the dashboard it required a full-time IT data collector, survey 1, 2, 3 person, at least 2 people in your office running for 6 weeks. And that's an 18-hour deployment. The one person we could not get rid of was the GIS technician, because there was a lot of corrective work. And that office back in your center is the most important office in the whole shop. The rest of us were just doing work. Questions? Go ahead.
You make it sound so appealing.
No, this is true. You're gonna have this event, and you have to be prepared for it.
Okay.
Well, this was between both presentations. We've also often referred to organizations or businesses having engineering firms on retainer.
Yeah.
And I wonder how many times do all these other multiple businesses have the same engineer on retainer? And suddenly the capacity for getting out to doing these detailed inspections is a problem. Yeah.
Right. My office has 1,500 employees, the one I'm with now, so we send out large people on events. But smaller offices, 2 or 3 guys. And the same thing happens with these smaller retained offices. They send a couple of skilled guys, after 4 or 5 days, they're done.
That's this EQUIP program that we're going to talk about this afternoon. That's a question on the application that you have to think about the bandwidth if KPFG or whatever, like how many places are they signed up to do? Okay, I mean, it's an important question.
Most commercial buildings will have an engineer. The private buildings will not. So you're not going to have that conflict. And generally, when you're doing emergency response, you're not doing commercial buildings.
Okay, any other last questions? Just to let you know, this is your break time, so. Food, information.
Go ahead.
I'm still curious about that. So without having a physical placard out there that gives you like a yellow tag, you're telling them, well, don't enter this room because the chimney's fallen down. How do you get that message and have it retained by the property owner?
Right, we do communicate. When we're doing the deployments outside of New York City, we always go with a municipal employee. So there is communication, irrespective of whether you placard the building or not. You have to communicate with the building owner, otherwise you're not going in to have a look around. Yeah. So we usually say that, irrespective of the damage of the placard that's on the building, they don't observe it anyway. Only what happens is the people, if they're moved out, if you have them moved out and they have to move, they're already out by the time you got there. That's my experience. Go ahead.
I'm guessing while you're out doing these inspections, there's someone in the jurisdiction that's responsible for making a huge public awareness campaign for what you're doing and why you're doing it, so that it's reinforcing all of the communication that's got to go on, so people know what do those placards mean and what are the processes to deal with it.
We did give out, this is what this training is about, we did give out sheets. One thing that we did do is you can expect mayoral executive orders. So here's what normally happens is to get rid of this large police component to enforcing this, you will have an executive order done by your mayor's office saying that now the person with the police power is actually a building official. And that will go on the building as well. You actually enforce an executive order. It's not done in a memo. You have to get the mayor's office to do it, to refresh it very frequently. And you do demolition orders by executive order. What you do is you're invoking police powers by the municipal agency. And they're agents. So we would be an agent of the municipal agency as long as we have a municipal employee with us.
Yeah, we're gonna discuss that a little bit more. We have developed a bunch of public messaging around this system in the RBDAP project that is now going into translation. Sandra has been developing it back there. So anyway, we have something that should be available in translating to 13 languages in this area for this system. Don't know, we're still planning on putting colored paper placards on buildings. So I'm not convinced on that yet, but I am.
Smaller agencies really use placards. That's what
I am convinced that you need a little break.